Welcome to the Augmented Society Network. We are a thematic network as part of the Royal Society of Arts and Manufacture. We explore, collaborate and reflect on the future of human interaction with technology. Title of today's session is Can Technology Help Us Build a New World? As we reimagine how we want to live and work together post-pandemic. I regret putting post-pandemic on there at this point. Anyway, part two will be in May, on May the 28th. The title is Unpacking Conversations About Our New World and Looking at Technology's Place Within It. Part three will be on the 25th of June, and the title there is Letting Go and Reforming a Future Built on Change. So I hope that you can see a progression there, laying out our thoughts and ideas, unpacking and reviewing them, and then hopefully coming back together, put some recommendations in place for us all to move forward as a result of joining forces and thinking as a group. I'm going to hand over the introduction now, part one of this series, to Jonathan Towse. He is the co-founder, along with myself, of the Augmented Society Network. We're very much part of RSA Fellows Network. If you're interested in joining the RSA, please take a look at the website at thersa.org. Jonathan, would you be kind enough to kick us off, please?
Absolutely. Thanks, Zoe. And I want to sort of put a bend to that because we do have an international audience here. The vision for Augmented Society Network is that society is a global society. So we more than welcome everybody's participation. And you don't have to be a technologist to, or even be playing around in this space, because the more representation of society we have, the better off we are in terms of opening up our minds to the possibilities. To dive into what we're talking about, obviously it's been on our mind. Nobody really had the full understanding of the impact that the pandemic would have. We've got an exciting road ahead of us as we continue to come to grips with it. We can learn so much about the way we think and behave in times like, what if we were able to use this enormous disruption as an opportunity? Listening for an emerging future is a term coined by Otto Scharmer of Theory U. As he said, in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic, it's almost made for this moment. Disruption has two sides, and we're surrounded by new and vastly different choices, but we can and will change the way we live and adapt quickly. What will that adaptation be? What can we do to take advantage of the enormous upheaval? Does this evolution require technology or provide a chance for us to just let it go? We talk about people being creative and needing to have new skills to live and work, but now that really does mean venturing deeply into the unknown, and understanding how to turn this into an incredible opportunity is not easy on our own. So we come to this with the mind of exploration, going into the things that none of us understands. I would imagine we've potentially never experienced this before, and hopefully we won't again, especially if we think well enough about how we can curb some of this stuff. And the things that we really want to discuss here, and this is, as Zoe said, it's a three-parter, right? So it's going to carry us through 2 months. And what we're hopeful is that this community and a growing community will share examples of what they see and what they've seen and what we're still to see about change that's happening. We're no longer able to say, well, this doesn't really, I'm not really happy in this, but it's too hard to change things, because we've all been forced into a huge change where we can no longer say that there's a normal that we're getting back to. We don't know what that new normal is. So we've been really excited by taking the bull by the horns and really going forward and looking at the potential for phenomenal, long-lasting change, understanding the difference between imagination and real experiences. And we all have experienced it more fully in communication with our own families on Zoom, that there is a bit of imagination that goes along with this technical experience. How do we remove the box and really thinking outside of what we know and what we're comfortable with? And I don't know how to respond to a lot of the stuff that comes out, publications, media, whatever, talking about, well, this is how it's going to be in the future, when so much of it is tied to how things were done in the past, whether it has to do with politics, whether it has to do with medicine, business, all those types of things. So it's like, this is the environment, this is the invitation to get out of that box. And ultimately, I'm hoping that we're able to see what we could not imagine before this, because that's where really exciting stuff happens. So we talk a lot about artificial intelligence as being a core way of augmenting society moving forward. And just the ability for companies to use artificial intelligence to start exploring what medications already exist that we don't have to wait for approval that could work with this. There's a couple of examples from companies in the UK, also in the United States, that are now going through so much data that is helping to discern what medications might be useful. And certainly, hopefully, they're not bringing up the medications that are born from, I don't know, fish tank cleaners. So we're hopefully being more realistic than that. But there's the opportunity. I would love for anybody else, if there's anything that you've seen recently that points to something exciting that we should explore further.
Just a few things. By way of background, I'm in my 70s, have a degree in mathematics, was a software engineer for some 30 years, and for the last 20 years or so, I've been a member of the Scottish Parliament. I've been a minister in that Parliament. I was responsible for example, our climate change legislation. And we have this week just established a committee to look particularly at COVID and government and public response to it. And I'm part of that committee. Just picking up a couple of points that you've made, Jonathan. First of all, on artificial intelligence, it is something that maybe has arrived, but I first got engaged with it in the 1970s. And until very recently, it's constantly been 5 years away from delivering something. But it may now be. I think if we use it properly at the moment, we probably should restrict ourselves to using it to eliminate options rather than to choose and validate options. Because I simply don't think it's a mature enough technology to take the risk of it validating options.
Right.
Eliminating them, yes, that's going to be helpful. The other one I think it would be useful just to point at is Andy Groves, who used to be in charge of Intel, now deceased. His autobiography was called Only the Paranoid Survive. And it's got a lot of very useful insights. In particular, he posits the idea of strategic inflection. The example he gives that relates to Intel is his company, about 90% of the company's business was in chips that were for memory. About 7% of the company's business was in producing computer processors. He went home on a Friday, came in on the Monday. A new foundry had opened in South Korea, making chips at a quarter of the price and with 4 times the capacity. 90% of his business disappeared in a weekend. Now, why did they survive and move forward? And the answer is because they had a flexible organization where people were empowered to make decisions and take risks and not overly criticized for doing so. And I think that, technology is going to be a very important part of where we've got to go forward with as a technologist. Well, I would say that. But even more important, we need people who actually have learned to and have taught to and have been given the opportunity to innovate, to take risks, and not be told that something can't be done. Mm. I think if we do anything, it's about finding ways of getting the education system and individuals to realize that actually everything's off the table. It's like Andy Groves on Monday morning. His business had disappeared in 3 days. That's where we are today. We don't know when this is going to end. We don't even know if this is going to end. We don't know how it's going to end. We don't know what's going to make it end. So I think at the end of the day, yes, technology, but actually people. Thanks.
Very good, Stuart. You talked about AI and being 5 years away, and it's that idea of what really is AI. What is the end of AI? And even with what we have now, what I constantly say that where AI is being successful now is in asking the questions, because you can't get the right answer without the right questions. We're filled with a society that constantly strives for the answer, that they'll even throw up an answer if they don't even know what it is. Yeah. And it's refreshing to hear, I don't know. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, what Stuart's partly discussing there is the ability to build a context on which to react to. And that takes a different kind of thinking if your business is suddenly destroyed within 48 hours. And this kind of context creation is something that I'm very interested in. Paul, did you want to come in?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to just share very exciting developments that are sort of leaping ahead at the moment on suicide prevention. And it's a very interesting kind of case study with transferable lessons for any kind of behavioural change or the development of augmented intelligence and so on. And it's also coming at a time when the government is still very uncomfortable even talking about suicide and suicide prevention. So it talks about death every single day in terms of deaths in hospitals and deaths in care homes and deaths in hospices, but it's still uncomfortable talking about suicide, which is a major problem in society we still need to change, because it's by talking about suicide that we save people's lives. But here's a case study for you. So back in 2013-14, I was asked to set up a global online forum for breakthrough ideas on suicide prevention. That led to a whole bunch of initiatives around policy development and countries developing national strategies and all sorts of things like that, which started to make some impact on the numbers, but not a huge amount. More money went into a lot of those not-for-profits and sort of advocacy groups and services without a significant increase in the numbers. One of those suggestions from those big ideas was called digital life-saving. The idea was to use digital communications technology to try and save lives. One of the case studies that we presented then was a bank which was micro-targeting, looking at people's social media feeds. And for instance, if somebody tweeted that they were dissatisfied with their bank, they would send them a message immediately saying, well, you can switch to our bank and it'll just be a press of a button, you'll get a better deal. Now, it's been a pretty hard slog for the last 6 years in trying to get this development going and actually made into a practical reality. 3 main problems, I would say. One is the institutions, including government and charities that have been much more, much better funded in the last 6 years, go about their normal business, which doesn't include digital technology solutions. It usually includes policy solutions, services, telephone helplines. They don't really get into digital big time. The second thing is they've all been busy. They've all been busy doing their normal things, and they've seen this as an extra that they'll do if they get round to it, if they absolutely have to. And the third thing is what I've kind of jovially called the ethics mob. And the ethics mob are people, well-meaning people, who say that there's all these ethical considerations which stop you doing anything. And I found the best way to deal with them, because we're all ethical as well, and all the technology companies are acting very ethically as well. So it's a myth that they're not. But my sort of way I found of dealing with them is if they say we can't do this because it's not ethical, or we can't do this because of all the ethical considerations, I say, well, if we've got evidence that this can save lives, what's the ethics of not doing it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that leads to a very different conversation. Anyway, COVID-19 comes along, everything changes, everybody's wanting to go online, government's putting out bids for grant submissions for rapid development of technology. I've been commissioned by the Department of Health and the Zero Suicide Alliance to set up a global online stakeholders forum, which I've set up and is now running with people from 27 countries. I've been approached by a whole bunch of these tech companies that I've been speaking to painfully for the last 6 years. They're now all wanting to go ahead within a matter of weeks or months to find solutions. One of the outcomes of this crisis is the number of suicides is going to go through the roof if we don't act, because you've got anxiety, separation, isolation, depression, financial crisis, people suddenly having no income, people losing loved ones and not being able to be by their side when they die, not being able to have funerals. The trauma is incredible and will last for a long, long time. And if we don't act, it will lead to a massive increase in number of suicides. We'll have another peak after all the other peaks. I actually got formally last week, I was actually asked for a brief by a leading augmented intelligence company based in Sydney. It's a global business, and they call it, always refer to augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence, because it's all real data that's being used here. So they asked me for a formal brief. So I wrote the brief and sent it to them. I gave them a deadline of 2 months to come up with a solution, because I want to publish the brief after 2 months. So they get 2 months to come up with a solution, or other companies can have a crack at it. I've just had 2 people from the Cabinet Office digital team ask me to send them the brief, and I said, I can't send you it now, but I can send you it at the end of the 2 months embargo. I've had the former National Clinical Director for the NHS on a Zoom call today. And the company that I'm working with is called Houston We Have. They've hooked up 3 times since I sent them the brief. And they have already got a model up and running in the space of 6 days. And they're pulling in all the data that they can find. And basically, they're just asking me what data from all the research evidence that exists, and there's lots and lots of it that exists, and we're gathering new information about what's happening in the current crisis. What data sources can give indicators that people might be at suicide risk or in suicide danger, actually identify them and put them in touch with emergency services and things like that. So it's all been done within those same frameworks, and it's an incredible revolution in the space of 2 weeks.
Right. It's interesting because we are seeing a lot of instances where things that might have taken 6 months or 6 years, because people have a little bit of time on their hands, it's happening right now. And all this data might have been collected before, but we were so busy doing our normal that we completely disregarded the data that was right under our noses. And
I've just come off watching the TV news where they talk about the development of the vaccines, where they're trying to reduce a 5-year development process into 3 to 6 months. Can I just be provocative and say that exact same process we've just been through for suicide prevention, you could apply it to anything else. You could apply it to child protection. You could apply it to domestic abuse. You could apply it to, you pick your issue.
So it's interesting because, like, something that's really personal to me is both of my kids have autoimmune issues, and we ran into a lot of problems, challenges trying to get them even diagnosed. And one of the things is the fact that there's so many symptoms that pop up all at once that the medical community wanted to pick on 1 or 2 instances. And we're seeing the same type of thing with the description of the symptoms of COVID-19. Oh, you'll have a high fever, nausea, diarrhea, tiredness. But then there's a whole bunch of people that haven't needed to go into the hospital that never had a fever, that were showing as mental issues, which is the same thing that is happening with my kids. And then you start talking about the specific details, like in both autoimmune issues, my kids' autoimmune encephalitis and COVID-19, they're saying, well, that blood-brain barrier is being broken, and we think that that's what's causing these mental issues. That's the cause. Is how is it getting past the blood-brain barrier? So it goes back to asking the right questions. Is that blood-brain barrier some magical Chinese wall, or is it different for everybody? And if we focus on those little things, the pieces of the bigger picture, we're now beginning to think that maybe this COVID-19 ain't so different from what we had already been seeing with autoimmune encephalitis and perhaps with other diseases. Yes.
Jonathan, can I come in? I think one of the things we want to think about is having the power not to ignore single isolated anomalies in particular areas of intellectual endeavour. I think back to my time as a software engineer, where we had a particular problem occurred, we gathered all the evidence, couldn't solve the problem, but we kept it. And we had a cupboard we put all the unsolved problems in. The problem occurred again, actually 4.5 years later. And it's the only other time the problem arose. And it was only when we compared the two, we realized what the problem was, and we were able to fix it so it never happened again. But it relied on our recognizing that you couldn't ignore that single anomalous occurrence in that environment. I think the same is true in lots of other environments, that every, Mao Zedong said a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And the same is true when something's coming down the road that's going to affect society, it's going to affect commerce, it's going to affect lots of things. It will not necessarily be recognized because we're automatically intellectually geared at saying, well, that's just an oddball. But actually, lots of these oddballs turn out to be the first of lots of balls. Right. So I think we've kind of got to, think about that and not imagine we haven't seen that issue. And it's all about back to how we change the way we think about things more generally.
I think that's interesting as well, because I'm exceptionally good at seeing what I want to see. And I've been seeing my reaction and trying to think it through in terms of some of the really scary, and I think, Sheila, you mentioned, is dystopia here or not? And then you said perhaps it is in certain places, which I'm not going to repeat. You can do that yourself. But I don't want to see that. So actually monitoring and letting some of the more dangerous things in is something that's incredibly important. And I need to do it to enable myself to deal with what's coming and where I am mentally within this utterly unknown situation. So keeping an eye on those sorts of things, Stuart, and understanding, again, for me, it goes back to the context I even put myself in is so specific. How do I bring myself back out of that and see some of the things that I really should be seeing that are important, the anomalies that you mention, the things that really are important? I don't know at the moment how to do that.
You sort of described, Zoe, the psychological phenomenon of confirmation bias. When you read a newspaper, your eye latches on the bits you're familiar with and passes over the unfamiliar. And we've got to find ways of resetting our attention. That's the important thing.
Yeah, on the theme of, it sounds like we're talking about sort of the need for serendipity and connecting things, which I was talking to Pip about.
Pip loves serendipity.
And given that this is called the Augmented Society, which is part of the reason why I tuned in, I've been interested in augmented intelligence since I saw Doug Engelbart talk in 1969. And I think we've really missed the boat on social media because they're not augmenting our intelligence, they're actually de-augmenting it. If we tuned our algorithms properly, they could do a much better job of figuring out where there's information that we should be aware of, getting the crowd to rate it and comment on it and upvote it in an intelligent way, and bring ideas, out and make connections that are not happening now except to engage people to watch ads. There's a line that the best minds of our generation are getting people to click ads. And if we got, those people thinking about how to get people to click on useful information, we'd have much better social media.
My frustration, Richard, all very good points, and it ties into my deepest frustration with what the world is going through now, is that there's so much of a gravity for so many people to hold on with all of their might to the me first mentality, as opposed to the us together mentality that we probably should be getting into. So you see it in the United States with those who are taking the loan/grant/unclear from the Small Business Association, where you can't claim ignorance for some of these companies that are applying or getting tens of millions of dollars, where there's really the small business owners of maybe a handful of employees that can't even get anything. And it is a bit like, unfortunately, there are so many factors that are based on how do we make money at all costs. It doesn't matter about others. That's a hard thing to break out. So I want to pose the question to the team here. What are some of the things that we're seeing about how to manifest the us together as opposed to relying on that old way of me too?
Sorry, can I just say something here? My name's Sheila McNeil from Glasgow. Obviously, I'm kind of in awe of some of the company and the names here. I'm an educator and an artist, and one of the things that I've noticed since the pandemic and since we've gone into lockdown here in the UK is actually that there is just the overwhelming sense of care in certain sections of the population. I mean, tonight at 8 o'clock, we'll all be going out and clapping for various people. But obviously, I think it goes back to some of the things that Stephen was talking about how we need to, and you were talking about at the beginning about imagining things. I think one of the problems we have with technology and what we were trying to do here and getting a more kind of human perspective of things is that there's still, the technology companies are still looking to make money. And the things that will get traction and get invested in are the things that make money. And we need to have a backlash against that. And we need to find ways to connect people. I've seen a huge amount of sharing. I'm based in higher education, but the amount of sharing that's happening across universities globally just now is amazing. You know, the people that are, you know, just sharing what they're doing. Again, they're just doing that. That's not coming from senior management because they're really worried about how they're going to pay and what they're going to do because they're not going to get students from China coming in September. So we need to have a kind of like that imagination thing. It's like, well, we need to how do we get senior managers in places and in government to actually start thinking completely differently? And I think they need to start talking to like the little people like me a bit more and start listening because people do have that imagination. People are doing amazing things just now. People are doing amazing things with technology. At the same time, there are other things that we're maybe going to be thrown at us, and that's why I put in the thing about bias. I'm quite worried about, so like I'm sure you all are in terms of artificial intelligence and some of the algorithms because there is so much bias inherent in what, and just because of the type of people that are creating this, and we are missing out so much. We're not looking at the right data all the time, and we need to be doing that. And even just in terms of tracking what's going on with COVID-19 just now, we're still not breaking that down properly. You know, so I'm just kind of worried. Sorry, I'm just probably rattling on just now. But I think how you empower people to have imagination is, and feel empowered to say things is really, really critical. And I think we can do that. And I think that, you know, the way that people have just kind of latched on to Zoom is one thing, but, you know, we are communicating, lots of people are communicating in ways that they never thought they would be able to before, never thought they would have to before. But we've done that. I mean, I work in learning technology. There's been more done in the last 6 weeks than there have been in the last 20 years since I've been working in the sector.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. But we not really again, we need to be evaluating that, and we need to be, you know, like let people have it. You know, we're obsessed by the ways that we did things, and there's maybe not enough attention on, well, how can we change? How should we change? Because a lot of people just want to go back, well, this is what we've always done, so how can we just recreate that? And technology can do that, and actually that's quite easy to do. It's maybe not the right thing to do.
I'd agree with almost everything you said. Just one thing jarred with me, but I'll identify that. And the first thing is that what you said about listening to us and listening from the ground up, I would entirely agree with, and everything I do these days is based on ground up engagement, because that's where the solutions tend to be. I work with a lot of people who say that everything they do is evidence-based, and we have this wrestle all the time about what evidence means and whether your evidence is up to date. Is it grounded in the reality of what's happening at the moment? And because things are so rapidly changing at the moment, and we're getting unprecedented experiences, we get a lot of top-down expert-led approaches. Now, we all want to hear the scientists and the medical experts telling us what is absolutely scientifically true and what is absolutely factually correct. We need more of that, but most of them don't know either what's going on at the moment. So to try and pretend that you have the answer is a dangerous place to be. And so, again, we encourage people to say, well, use all your evidence and your expertise and your knowledge and so on, but listen to what's happening on the ground and the targeting, which is what a lot of this technology and augmented intelligence can do. And the one thing I would just challenge from what you said, Sheila, there is about, and I think it's another bias, is these companies just out to make money. Because the people I work with are certainly not just out to make money. They're individuals who have a passion about doing something. And the same thing's happening with vaccines at the moment. There are some big pharmaceutical companies where there'll be a lot of people seeing a business opportunity, but there's a lot of passionate, compassionate individuals who want to try and do something now to help people.
I think there's an interesting analogy there as well, going back to what Jonathan was saying about how do we create those networks, how do we put ourselves first, not us first. And we've been all talking about, you know, all being in the same boat in this, but actually the analogy, I can't remember where I got it, was basically we're all in the same storm, but we all have vastly different boats.
Yep.
And some of us actually, you know, have life-saving rings or are just clinging to the last piece of wood off a ship. Some of us are sailing through on a lovely big smart ship and not picking up anyone else. And I think there's a difference there in some of the financial models, which do need to be deeply questioned. Clearly, Richard Branson putting up Necker Island as collateral, an island that has been flooded, has suffered greatly from fire damage, and you know it's not much of a good piece of collateral, to be honest. Thank you very much. But this should be leading us to questioning some of those financial models, and I think that's where it's different, Sheila, in that, you know, those companies that are offshore, that are, you know, the difference between tax avoidance and tax evasion, for example, is always one that's interesting. But I think going back to what Jonathan was saying, how do we build boats for everyone in this storm? Is there a way of doing that we can, as a group, think about?
I'd just like to throw a suggestion there of following up on that part of the conversation, that if the governments of the world are borrowing huge amounts of money in order to try and rescue the economy, and if this is in a situation where we talked about AI before, where robots are making more and more of the stuff that we need in order to survive in the world, with things being automated, the question ultimately arises, if everybody's going to be hugely in debt, who are they in debt to?
Yeah.
And we kind of came to this point in 2008, really, because when government started, you know, doing the quantitative easing. And it seems to me, you know, that referring back to the question, you know, can technology help us build a better world? Well, in the context of increasing automation and AI, then isn't there an opportunity just simply to press reset on the whole debt thing and you know, start with something completely different? You know, who owes who what now? And isn't technology the way to tackle that?
Right. I just wanted to say a little thing. I think actually the most important person on the screen is Sheila. And the reason she's the most important because she's involved in teaching. What I was going to say is, among other things, I'm a pilot, private pilot. And the way you learn in flying is you see one, the instructor shows you, you do one, the instructor watches, and then you have to teach the instructor how to do it to show that you've understood what you've learned. So it's see one, do one, teach one. And the key point about that is that actually you're not just acquiring a knowledge base, you're not just acquiring an autonomic skill that means that your hands move the right amount of controls. You're learning how to solve problems that you haven't ever met. And that is actually the key challenge. We need lots of people in that position. And that comes through the process, I think, and I can be challenged on this, of learning how to teach. And of course, the first thing before you can teach is you have to listen and respond and adapt. And I think that's the key thing. We need to equip people to deal with problems they've never met before, because sure as hell that's going to happen.
Right. So Stuart, if I can turn that back to what Sean had asked about, how can we utilize technology, or do we need technology to make this stuff happen? And I'll just bring up a really quick example. I'm not going to get into the details. My company Kaleido has always been about, we're futurists looking at the future, helping our clients to meet that future. And we also have an arm that is working with building society through community, passionate communities. And so a lot of our work deals with Comic-Cons. And when the Comic-Cons started dropping like flies, we looked at, well, we've got partnerships, we've got clients that could together, connecting all the dots, could create a virtual con that can be as close to being there as possible for most people in this world, where there's real-time conversation connected with buying. We also knew there were a lot of vendors that were stuck with a lot of inventory and no place to sell it. So from March 18th until now, we've been working on Virtual Pop Expo, which is going May 9th and 10th. We're not charging any fees to enter. We're not charging the booth owners any fees. And it's altruistic for us because this is what the people need. Is it going to be the best thing since sliced bread? Who knows? But it's that, to me, I'm proud of what we're doing because it's not about the commercial. And I understand there's a need for commercial, right? But it's about providing something for society that is beneficial because people need this community. Vendors need to be able to not lose their shirts threefold. So that's one way that technology has helped us take the idea of helping others and put it into place.
Just very quickly, first of all, Sean, I absolutely agree with you. Money is a human construct. And now is probably a good time as ever to look at how that could be readdressed. Basically, our businesses run call centres. We deliver services for the Scottish Government and large utilities. Our people have taken to home working like a duck to water, but I think there's a few issues here around, I live in a nice big house. Lots of people don't have that luxury. I know I've got some staff in bedrooms, in lounges, etc. So I think there's a danger that the people with the money afterwards will be saving more money, whereas other people will have to go back to work because of their physical limitations. I'm really interested in having a debate about artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence that empowers the individual, not So we've spent a lot of time with our data, and I met Stuart. It seems a long time ago, Stuart. I think it was only about 4.5 weeks ago at the Scottish Parliament where we were exhibiting. It's about giving the people the power, the insight, the opportunities. I think, unfortunately, if we try to do the macro piece, the policy piece, there are organisations that are just full of policy people from top to bottom. But the people they serve have the same issue this year that they had last year, that they had the year before, that their parents had 20 years ago, that their parents had 40 years ago. So it is a time of change. So I'm really interested in having a debate. We're a non-profit, by the way, about how we can use this to empower people who at the moment aren't empowered. And our stats show that over 88% of our customers have smartphones. So people have the vast majority of our customers have the tool in their hand. Right. It's just we're not giving them stuff to. So we got lots of data. We're really up for that debate. So if anyone wants to reach out, I'll put my email address on there. Unlike Paul, there are millions of Andrew Bartlett.
Sure, and I think something that's going to be very important in terms of that empowerment is, for me anyway, is understanding the value of human-centered design. And terms like, just in time, creating works that can get out. I know, Paul, you'll be very aware of that. Taking away the barriers to some of the smaller or incredibly useful pieces of technology that we could actually employ, using crowdsourcing as it feels so old-fashioned to say that now, but this is the time to empower and to get or have the ability to talk to people who really are on the edge of this, dealing with this day in, day out. And absolutely, Andrew, all of our experiences are incredibly different.
And I'll be very quick. Again, I keep thinking everything's changed here. everything's changed. Another example is call centres that have insisted for years you all have to be packed into a central location, often with the most appalling working conditions, and now they're all working from home because the technology exists to do it. And one of the leading telecommunications companies in Australia and Asia, Optus, has just announced that they're going to make it permanent. They're not going to go back to central call centres. They're going to make home working permanent. So there's a lot of things like that happening at the moment where the world has completely changed, and we've got to benefit from that.
And I think also certain governments taking advantage, a bad news day, to enable other things to go through less challenged or even, invisible to us at the moment. There are a lot of things that are going on in terms of legislation that is in no way putting us in a better position.
That's why we've got to take, as best we can, control. I firmly believe that we have moved into an age of micro versus macro. And so many of the vehicles in the old world were about broadcasters. What's the reach? What's your one fell swoop reach? And the amount of data that exists now allows us really to get into the detail. And if anyone's interested, I'm happy to share a private link on YouTube to a presentation that me and my partner did in India, Majority Report, which is all about how can we take control back from the Facebooks, from these. There's a give and take in all of this, because in the same breath, people are like, oh, I don't want more data captured. I don't want, your data is already being captured. So why not take our data being captured and put it to good use, but with us being in control? And we talk about how the incorporation of blockchain is going to help with that, which, to the same point that has been made previously about AI not being what was promised, and it's been in 5-year increments, and we still haven't reached the 5-year mark. The same is with blockchain. But it does take imagination to think about the what ifs, as opposed to how do we just do tech to replicate or take away jobs, like remove jobs or what have you that were there before. That Mitchell, who usually talks often, has been having this work relationship with Sheila in the chat, which has been fascinating. Any other thoughts that we want to bring in? We only have roughly 10 minutes left. Ian.
Hi, everybody. Thanks. Fascinating conversation here. Stuart, I did my first bit of AI in 1980s. It was good old-fashioned AI, symbolic AI, rules engine. It was the first AI winter, and basically I've been working very closely over the last few years around scaling expertise, and it's a lot about knowledge capture. And if you're the psychologist in the room, please put your hands around your ears, because it's about the difficulty of extracting that out of people's heads. There's a UK company that's got a patented methodology that's 32 times quicker than anything else, and you can mathematically prove you have the expert's knowledge embedded in that. So if you're talking about people-centric and putting it back to the barrier of people, I think it's all about knowledge and capture, and Sheila, it's all about understanding stuff and learning and getting that very quickly. So for example, huge amounts of things about medical we're talking about today for obvious reasons, and 40% of all doctors' diagnostics are wrong. And we just go that with everybody's nuances, and Jonathan, the insight about certain conditions and everything else on this. So here's an example, real example. Capturing the knowledge of a doctor, 25 years experience, sat down with the doctor, working from left to right. What's the most obvious things that come with a typical patient coming to your room? Sickness, vomiting. So you go through that, step through that. Then it was all the other cases. So covered about the 6 or 7 typical things a regular GP would practice. Got that model done in 2 days. 2 days. That means anybody could go follow through the doctor's thinking. And the most important thing, of course, is you've got to explain the reasoning of it. Because yes, we have all these data, and I've worked with the 111 service in the UK, 250 decision trees, signed off British standards, all the clinicians, and actually it's about protecting and making that wrong decision and the consequences of that, not about patient-centric response. So there's a lot of, it's a lot of, compliance and things around that. So the technology exists. 95% of the investment, everybody talks about AI, is all about data. And IBM Watson can't explain the reason why behind something. All right. So if you can't explain the reason why, we all know that with human-based decisions, if you can't do it, you can't use it. And that's not to say the data and everything else is really important, but it's in that context of that. So I think the massive challenge at the moment, the opportunity is scaling, and there's a big reset button, and it is about changing people's roles. The other last thing I'm just going to say about education. Yes, learning stuff quickly and rapidly. How do you do that? Here's an example. Police stop and search regulations in the UK. 2.5 days to train the police officers. It was done in 1 hour. And here's a real example. This new methodology is nothing about psychology. It's a neural basis from your brain, basically from your front, to get it in long-term memory, and proven with a school kids in Northumberland. They did, I believe it was a biology GCSE, which is UK sort of 16-year-old sort of first level. And they did the biology course in 1 hour, the whole year syllabus in 1 hour. And the results were almost the same as the years. And these were children who are less deprived area, not a great school or anything like that. And that's a new type of methodology, and that's being used around. So there are two areas. There's some quite lots of innovation. It's not so much tech, there's a methodology. Right. And of course, building these models and using it and putting a chat on the front of it, it's very easy to do. But it's all about how rapidly you capture that knowledge and how do you do these things in a rapid way. And it's a lot to do with these new types of methodologies, which actually can be really augmentation, but it does require some good old human aspects of actually capturing this and scaling up experts. Sean, just the last comment is that I think the amount of money, and we can have a big debate about what money is these days, and right. Central banks are taking over what money is, and I think, you know, digital currencies from banks, you know, whatever that might happen. But I think from a basic point of view is, and I see it here definitely in the UK, people are looking at, you mentioned the Bransons, and people remember that now. It's been very, you know, one of the things people are reflecting and everything around. So the fact that all companies some have furloughed, and there's great debates here about Premier League and footballers and all that sort of stuff. It will be, you know, you now have our money, which is the government's money. So I think companies will have to reflect that in terms of their societal response and how their governance is done. I think there will be a change on that. It will be less about, there'll be aspects you've got to make money, but it'll be less about, you know, the dividends, and see all these cases about people, you know, furloughing people, but they've taken the £1 million bonus and those sort of things. I think that will shift. I think
absolutely in terms of, you know, what I might call the brand story, you're absolutely right. The story of how you got your millions and billions is incredibly and increasingly important in terms of how you interact with your customers and what your future looks like. I hold on to that being as important now and growing in importance in the future.
Just to pick up Stuart's point about watch one, do one, teach one. I first came across that. It was a microsurgeon who talked to me about that. This is how doctors are trained. You get 3 cadavers and you get a chance to do the autopsy on 3 bodies, and you watch and you observe, you do, and then you teach. But they also, the doctors have a 4th category, which is kill one. So you have watch one, do one, teach one, kill one. And you learn more from the first death that you that occurs than you do from the first 3 areas. We have to learn from this experience, because we are seeing an extraordinary thing occurring in our society at the moment, in our societies. Huge amounts of learning that has to take place, and there's nothing that is a better instigator of change than the threat of death. And I think there's a threat, there's a kick to us, but we have to take this very positively, and we have to see how we change and how we move forward. You know, I'm coming from a teaching and from an art, and I'm part of the RSA. I've been since 2010. I'm coming from an arts background, really. But we have to see the opportunities that are being uncovered here. But I think we have to really look at the problems that are occurring and actually dig down and dig deeper. It's just an addendum to Stuart's point.
And I think that, thank you very much for adding that. I think it's an incredibly poignant way to finish our session today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.